Guys, the weapon safety rules. I'm just going to give you a really quick yet detailed rundown as to what they mean to me and how you should be performing them. You follow these 4 golden rules when it comes to weapons handling, and the gun could literally go off and you'll never have a problem. However, in life, you're probably going to have to sacrifice on these rules in certain situations at certain periods of time. And so being aware of that and mitigating the level or time of exposure will only help to serve you and those around you by helping to keep your levels of awareness up and your practices and your habits safe. So, weapon safety rule number 1, treat every weapon as if it is loaded. Look, this here is an unloaded weapon system. No magazine is inserted around the chamber. What we call condition 4. You should also know your weapons conditions. But I don't just go around talking with my hands. I don't go around pointing it at different things. I don't go tossing it to people. I still treat it as if it could go off at any point in time if this trigger was actually pulled back to the rear. So weapon safety rule number 1, treat every single weapon. We say weapon because we're talking about anything that potentially has a projectile as if it were loaded. Treat every weapon as if it were loaded at all times. And I got a video that I normally play in the class where it's a cop talking to a gun store owner about a gun on display behind the counter. Gun store owner pulls it out, gives it to the cop. The cop actually chambers around and then shoots his finger off somehow. Anyways, point is, treat every weapon as if they are loaded. Weapon safety rule number 2, keep your finger, meaning your trigger finger, straight up and off that trigger until you're actually aimed in and ready to fire. Now, what do I mean by this? This is your trigger finger. So with that meaty portion of your J hook up underneath that beaver tail and nice high firm pistol grip, you're keeping this thing straight at all times. I used to say keep your trigger finger straight up and off the trigger until you're aimed and ready to fire, but it was just a little too redundant and confusing. So keep your finger straight up. This is not acceptable, ladies and gents. Look, if you're like a Delta Force dude or a Tier 1 guy and this is what you do, I'm not going to tell you how to live your life. Obviously, you know what you're talking about, what you're doing. But what I will say is to everybody else in the world, this right here is waiting to happen a number of times. Look, when we're in high stress situations, we clench our fists. It's a natural response that we have once that sympathetic nervous system kicks up, that fight or fear based response. And so if you have the habit of a lazy trigger finger, always keeping it over that trigger guard right there, a couple things. One, when you go to draw, you'll probably be clenching your hand and you won't even have good dexterity in your hand because you're so freaking scared and nervous and you're dealing with that sympathetic nervous system overtaking your body. So you probably won't even feel your hand clutching. You'll just be clutching and then you'll accidentally slip into your trigger and end up shooting yourself. Or if you get in a shoving match in the process thereof, because most concealed carry engagements begin less than 5 feet from one another, think robbery, rape, assault, things like that. So if you have a lazy trigger finger and you get into a hand-to-hand with somebody and you go to draw your gun, bam, you could end up pulling that trigger for sure. You get pushed over, bam, you could end up pulling that trigger, sending a bullet way up into the sky somewhere. And so keeping it straight up and off that trigger until you are actually aimed and ready to fire. Now, yes, as you get more advanced in your shooting career, there are other times where you'll be shooting without being fully aimed in and presented. I get that. But for 99% of the rest of you out there, keep that finger straight up and off the trigger until you're actually aimed in and then ready to fire. That's when it comes down here. When we're doing weapons manipulation, locking the slides to the rear, loading and unloading, that trigger finger stays straight and up. Most particularly, it stays straight. Look, if you got to disassociate it all the way out here so that you can lock the slide to the rear on whatever type of gun it is that you're using, then do that. But you need to practice on keeping this thing straight because these tendons are all tied together. You can't touch your middle finger to your hand without your ring finger, for example, moving down. And so you have to stretch out those tendons. You have to build that muscle memory, that neural memory within the skeletal muscle network on keeping it straight at all times, because you're never going to rise to the occasion. You're only going to fall back to the greatest level of training you've ever received. And if the greatest level of training you've ever received is bad habits that you've done continuously for X amount of time, months, weeks, days, even years, decades, then you're only solidifying the likelihood of having some sort of an incident. So keep that finger straight up and off the trigger until you are aimed in and then ready to fire. Weapon safety rule number 3, never point the weapon at anything you're not willing to destroy. So here we have the muzzle, which is the front of the gun. Out of that is what the bullet travels from. Whatever this happens to be pointing at, that's where the bullet is going to be going towards. And so you had better be willing to destroy it if you're going to be pointing a weapon at it. The way that I tell people is that I keep it flat to the deck, parallel to the ground. Act as if there's kids running around you at all times. Whenever we're doing our loading or unloading drills, we bring it up here to that workspace. But look how I flare the gun. Some people flare extra. I like to just flare it out just for that safety measure. And boom. I also think that it saves me time when it goes back to just this right here. So I'm not all the way up here and having to make that big of a movement and motion both up and then back down. And then I'm right back on target again. And so keeping that barrel flat to the deck, pointed in that safe direction, the other thing about this is that when you get into presenting your weapon, especially if you start using something like a red dot, a lot of people have trouble finding that red dot because the weapon is usually canted whenever we come up to our sights. So you're going to want to get in the habit of keeping that thing absolutely flat. You want to feel that force, that punch, so that your barrel is flat to the deck, your weapon's flat to the deck, and you'll pick up those sights a lot faster. Also, you won't even eventually need your sights because when your body develops that memory of just pushing out forward and whatever you're looking at is what you're aiming at, because you bring the sights to your eyes, not your eyes to the sight, but without even having to use your eyes anymore, your muscular skeletal system, the framework here, is so familiar because of the amount of repetitions that you have as to what exactly needs to be done. You could literally close your eyes and you should be right on target. So yesterday we were doing some drills, starting here, closing our eyes, pushing straight out, and then we would pull the trigger, and then we would see where we shot. And the closer you are to where you think you are in your mind, obviously, the better muscle memory that you have. So always treat every weapon as if it is loaded. Keep your finger straight up off the trigger until you're aimed and ready to fire. Never point the weapon at anything you're not willing to destroy. The other thing about not pointing the weapon at anything you're willing to destroy. Guys, appendix carry, I don't know, you do you. I've done it many times. Makes me feel very uncomfortable. That's a little side note. But what I will say is that people often, when they do weapons manipulation, they will turn the gun. Don't turn the gun, especially on the firing line. Who's going to be next to you? Turn your body. That muzzle is anchored downrange. Downrange is where the targets are, where the bullets are going. Bullets are going down that way. Uprange is supposed to be the safety zone. Keep this thing anchored. Turn your body, not the gun. If you're doing movements, like running movements, keep the weapon anchored downrange in that safe direction. Never point it at anything you're not willing to destroy. All right. Lastly, know your target. Consider the foreground and the background. Why does this matter? Well, because we have to know what we're shooting at for a number of reasons. One, legal liability. Two, ethical, moral reasons, liability. Probably want to do the reverse of that. You don't want to shoot somebody that you don't want to shoot because they're threatening your life or to take your life or somebody else's life, grievous bodily injury. Anyways, how do we know our target? Hands, waist, and face. Got a lot of videos out there now, especially on Instagram, YouTube, where I'm talking about when would you draw your weapon? When is it appropriate to do so? And you're seeing these road rage incidents where guys are coming up with their hands behind their waist. That's 2 red flags right there. Well, it's really more than that. It's 3 because you're in a road rage incident. They exited their vehicle and now they're approaching you with their hand like this. I'm drawing my gun on that person. And I mean, of course, state dependent, know your legalities, but this is the importance of knowing your target. Hands, waist, and then lastly, face, overall demeanor. Maybe you need to recognize a person later on. Maybe you can see their intent in their eyes. But my point is that you want to be observing hands. So in a road rage incident, somebody's getting out of their vehicle. They come around their vehicle. People have the tendency to lock on to the eyes of that person. Why? Because of mirror neurons, and that's gateway to the soul. It's what we do as human beings. But that's not the point here. What we're concerned about is what's in his hands. And if we don't see anything in his hands, what's around his waist? What's he doing with his hands and his waist? Is he reaching for something? Does he have something on there that he's walking open carrying? Does he have his hand underneath his shirt? Something like this. You guys see what I'm saying? Because that's where we keep weapons most of the time. And then lastly, face. That's when we go to the face. That's when we see the demeanor. But coming around that car, I see a weapon in that hand. I'm already unholstered if you're a maniac and you've cut me off and boxed me in somewhere on the road, I'm already unholstered. And then I see you get out of your vehicle. Okay, now I got both my hands on that gun down here in that low modified sitting ready position. And then I see you walk around your car. I'm looking at your hands and your waist. That's it, hands and waist. And I see a weapon, I'm going to engage you. Now, if I see that your hands are behind your waist, I'm going to present and I'm going to be ready to engage you. Because that, to me, is reasonable belief that I'm about to receive death, great bodily harm, or injury, especially if I'm with my family or somebody that I love or care about. So I don't really hang out with too many people. Anyways, point is hands, waist, face. Know your target. Okay, it's important for ethical and moral reasons, but also for legal liability as well, which is why I recommend you join JM Training Lethality University and you get USCCA Elite level membership with elite level benefits. So that includes all that Delta Force, that Delta defense, insurance, coverage, everything, plus access to all of their training, my training, all the training you could ever want in the world. Anyways, if you want more information on that, go to joemalonetraining.com, Lethality University. But I digress back into the weapon safety rule, know your target, consider the foreground and the background. Why does the foreground matter? Life is dynamic. Things move, people move, kids, other people come in nearby. Your wife might get snatched up and pulled in front of you while you're in the process of drawing your gun because most concealed carry engagements start less than 5 feet from one another. You could be in a vehicle and you might need to shoot through a windshield. How's that windshield going to affect the trajectory of your round? Because you will be held accountable morally, ethically, and then also legally if that round goes somewhere and hits somebody that it wasn't intended to hit, that you weren't justified in hitting with it. So understanding what lies between you two is very important. What if they're behind cover? What if they're behind concealment? What's the difference between the two? What if you're behind one or the other? How's that going to affect your method, your mode of engagement? And so just know your target, consider the foreground, and then lastly, the background. Bullets will travel through things, especially this close, 900, 1100, 1200 feet per second for, a lot of handgun caliber weapons. It's going to cut through somebody like butter. Regardless of the size, for the most part, the vast majority of them will push through people. That's why it's important you understand what is the backstop behind the thing that you are engaging. Is it a wall? Is it an open street? Is it a busy street? Is it a car? Is it another person? You have to know these things. You have to be capable of having spatial awareness, the physical awareness of what is taking place around you in that high stress moment prior to you beginning to execute said movements of drawing your weapon and engaging somebody. You have to know how to do that stuff. And that's the importance of taking next level training and having good thought process training in high stress situations, like having to problem solve while shooting targets at the same time, while getting your heart rate up, while enduring physical stress. Then solving more complex problems with more intensity to each of those stressors added onto you in a nice controlled environment. That's what makes most firearm training very, very fun and very challenging and very fulfilling, because you're really doing something new. It's a true physical skill set that is also cultivating a new mindset, a new way of thinking about things and seeing things in this world. And that's what's so beautiful about empowering ourselves with any sort of a skill, whether it's sports or music or firearms training. Like it's, all in the same realm of self-improvement, just various different aspects. And so I can't encourage you guys enough to get that type of training. And if you want, that's what we do over at JM Training. You can talk to anybody who's a part of it. We go shooting every single month, and we have all sorts of cool new little things that we're constantly working on, helping one another, keep each other accountable, and then improve upon our overall ability to protect ourselves. And if we could eventually train all the communities in the local area, well, that's a town that criminals aren't just going to want to mess with. But anyways, know your target, consider the foreground and the background. Lastly, on the background piece, hollow point ammunition, self-defense type ammunition, that's what you need to be carrying with you out and about in your day. On the range, use some ball ammunition or some frangible ammunition, but when you are walking about yourself with your everyday carry, or EDC as they call it, then you should be having hollow point or some sort of defensive ammunition in there, because what that's designed to do is to break apart upon impact with that target, with that bad guy, with that bad person. And it then limits the overpenetration and maximizes interior stopping power. And so you have a greater chance of neutralizing the threat. You have a greater chance of not hurting anybody else if in the moment you do make this call, this shot, and then somebody does walk behind that person, that target. They have a infinitely greater chance of not being hurt or killed whenever they are passing through and you are in the process of engaging that criminal. And so, really important they have the right type of ammunition. For home defense itself, there's home defense ammunition. And just a side note, I think the best home defense weapon system is a shoulder fired 9mm rifle, or like handgun, like an MP5 or MPX or something like that, with 9mm hollow point ammunition and a red dot and a flashlight on the front. I think that that is the best home defense weapon. That's my opinion. What do you guys think? In the state of Illinois, people can't have that, so I usually recommend a shotgun, 20 gauge, 12 gauge, semi-auto pump. It doesn't really matter. You just kind of have to know what you're doing when you use it. Semi-auto shotguns are badass, but they're very difficult if you have to deal with a stoppage. Pump action, much more reliable. Anyways, recap of the weapon safety rules. 1, treat every weapon as if they are always loaded. 2, keep your finger straight up and off that trigger until you are aimed in and ready to fire. 3, never point the weapon at anything you're not willing to destroy. 4, know your target, hands, waist, and face. Consider the foreground and the background. And then look, there's one fifth golden type of overarching, constantly present weapons safety rule as well. And that is always know the condition of your weapon. And the condition of your weapon is subjective to its state of being loaded or unloaded or partially loaded, depending upon what part of the process it is currently in. And so if you don't know what weapons conditions are, leave a comment. I'll make a whole video on that. It's a really huge, fundamental, important principle of understanding and becoming really proficient and competent in firearms handling. So those are the weapon safety rules. Let me know if you have any questions at all. I'm here to help you out any way that I possibly can understanding that, because once you have those ingrained into your brain eventually is going to be tired of thinking about it, burning calories, so it puts it in the subconscious. Once we get it into that subconscious where you are now unconsciously competent, when we're talking about the learning hierarchy, unconscious competence means you just do it. And when you are just doing weapon safety in all the varieties of environments that you could possibly be in, that's when you're one safe dude or one safe chick. And you're probably pretty badass at handling weapons at that point, because you're doing the right thing and you're building incredible fundamentals, and incredible fundamentals repeated over a period of extended time have compound value, and you become really badass at whatever it is that you're trying to do. So thank you all very much. Hope you have a great night, and I will talk to you soon.